Visualize standing on the bridge of a multi-mission surface combatant at 0400 hours on a humid Tuesday during the first week of June. The Gulf of Oman, stretching eastwards from the volatile Strait of Hormuz, appears calm, yet the air vibrates with the hum of high-end electronics. This specific morning in 2026 marks a turning point in maritime history. Under the cover of darkness, the Arleigh Burke-class unit, a premier grey-hulled sentinel of the American fleet, maintains a rigorous economic blockade protocol. While public reports suggest a routine operation, classified sensor logs tell a far more complex story of electronic dueling. Along the jagged Makran coast, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy activates commercial-grade radar arrays, scanning the horizon for the distinctive signature of a destroyer. By dawn, the geopolitical map shifts as Tehran's state-run media broadcasts a bold claim: a successful strike on the vessel's primary command and control heart. Washington counters immediately, asserting that their Aegis-equipped asset remains unblemished, having neutralized every incoming hazard long before impact. To understand how we arrived at this standoff, one must look back to the outbreak of broader conflict in late February 2026. That spring, the United States inaugurated an extensive naval exclusion zone around Iranian waters, a level of traffic restriction not witnessed in this theater for decades. The American destroyer set the tone for this operation by intercepting the MV Tuska, a merchant vessel flying the Iranian flag. This maneuver served as a physical demonstration of dominance that forced Tehran into a corner. When Iranian commanders issued their response on that Tuesday morning, they were deploying a strategic narrative, blaming a malfunctioning American Patriot missile. For a domestic audience hungry for resistance and an international community watching the oil markets, the claim functioned as a weapon of its own. Naval historians often note that in the age of instant connectivity, the first version of a story often carries more weight than the eventual verified truth. Iranian strategists understand that a neutralized attack can be framed as a triumph if the press release moves faster than the Pentagon's official rebuttal. While the world's attention focused on the reported strike on the warship, a much broader campaign of disruption ignited across the region. Iranian-linked surface assets and aerial drones swarmed various infrastructure hubs. Explosions rocked the perimeter of Kuwait International Airport, and separate waves of munitions targeted logistics facilities in Bahrain. This coordinated chaos produced an immediate economic shockwave. Within a single day, Lloyd's of London underwriters issued standard 72-hour cancellation notices to reprice risk, sharply spiking war risk premiums for any cargo carriers moving through these contested waters. This decision forced global shipping giants to make a grueling choice: pay high war risk premiums or abandon the route entirely. Most chose the latter, rerouting large tankers around the southern tip of Africa. This detour adds thousands of miles to the journey, forcing companies to burn an additional $340,000 in fuel per craft. As over 100 merchantmen turned their bows away from the Persian Gulf, nearly a fifth of the world's liquefied natural gas supply effectively vanished from the immediate market. Tehran's planners aimed to ensure that if the naval cordon cost their economy $150 million to $170 million a day in lost oil revenue, the rest of the world would feel a proportional amount of financial pain. Examining the technical mechanics of the engagement reveals a stark disparity in the cost of modern warfare. The primary surface combatant in this theater utilizes the Mk-41 vertical launch system, a grid of 96 cells capable of firing a variety of defensive and offensive interceptors. When a swarm of Shahed 136 drones, each costing about as much as a used sedan, approaches the hull, the defense math becomes a nightmare. An SM-2 Block 3C effector, the standard choice for medium-range defense, carries a price tag exceeding $2 million. Launching a dozen of these to stop a swarm that cost Iran less than $250,000 represents a substantial advantage for the attacker's treasury. The real risk is the inventory itself. These warships cannot replenish their magazine cells while bobbing in the waves of the Arabian Sea. To reload, the vessel must navigate to a specialized pier, such as the one at Bahrain Naval Support Activity, and utilize heavy cranes in a process that can take days. A combatant that empties its magazine against a low-cost drone swarm becomes a $2 billion target with no long-range teeth, a vulnerability the IRGC Navy hopes to exploit through sheer volume. To counter this asymmetry, the crew relies on a layered defense architecture, starting with the 20mm Phalanx close-in weapon system. Known colloquially as R2D2, due to its distinctive white dome, this autonomous Gatling gun serves as the platform's final line of protection. It fires tungsten alloy penetrators at a rapid rate of 75 rounds per second. The design of the Phalanx lies in its efficiency. A typical engagement burst costs roughly $6,900. By funneling low-speed drones into the close range of the Phalanx, the combatant's commanders preserve their high-cost ordnance for much faster, more dangerous targets, like anti-ship cruise projectiles. This strategy, validated by recent operational assessments, creates a cost-effective bubble around the hull, and it requires the crew to have nerves of steel, letting hostiles get within a few thousand yards before opening fire. Physics acts as a persistent adversary. Earth's curvature obscures low-flying targets, forcing radar beams to lose sight of anything hugging the water. A sea-skimming munition leaves only 65 seconds of reaction time for the combat team. This narrow window applies to a RAD projectile traveling at Mach 0.9. If the incoming bird is a supersonic variant moving at Mach 2, that reaction window collapses to a mere 53 seconds. In that minute-long span, the Aegis framework must detect the target, categorize it as hostile, assign a weapon, and launch the interceptor. Any interference from Iranian electronic warfare units, which can degrade radar sensitivity by up to 20%, further shrinks this razor-thin margin for error. The crew is fighting the very geometry of the planet. To bridge this gap, the Navy employs a networked approach known as over-the-horizon targeting. Hovering far above the conflict zone, E-2D advanced Hawkeye aircraft act as the eyes in the sky. These turboprop planes carry a large rotating radar dish capable of spotting sea skimmers from hundreds of miles away. Using a high-speed data link called the Cooperative Engagement Capability, or CEC, the Hawkeye transmits the exact coordinates of an incoming hostile directly to the warship's fire control computers. This allows the vessel to launch a weapon at a target its own onboard radars cannot even see yet. This integration effectively expands the defensive perimeter by hundreds of miles, giving the crew minutes of breathing room instead of seconds. During the June 4th encounter, this airborne surveillance was the deciding factor, allowing the Aegis suite to calculate intercept solutions while the dangers were still far beyond the horizon. Moving beyond the kinetic exchange, we must examine the maturation of Iranian hybrid doctrine. The events of early summer highlight a strategy where the information operation is just as important as the physical projectile. By striking regional targets like airports and naval assets simultaneously, Iran creates a saturation of the senses for global policymakers. They do not need to sink a high-cost platform to win. They only need to convince the insurance markets and the public that the area is no longer safe. This grey zone warfare seeks to achieve strategic goals without triggering a full-scale conventional war. In this environment, the Navy's most potent counterweapon is a high-resolution satellite image. Open-source intelligence researchers now use commercial satellite data to verify the location and condition of vessels within hours of an incident. On June 4, 2024, these independent analysts confirmed the American aircraft carrier was still operating in its designated station, completely undamaged, effectively neutralizing the propaganda victory. The current positioning of the fleet also represents a decade of tactical evolution. In previous eras, American surface assets would often patrol inside the narrow confines of the Persian Gulf. Today, commanders prefer the open reaches of the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea. This geographic shift forces Iranian forces to rely on long-range drones and air-launched ordnance, rather than their dense batteries of coastal artillery. By staying outside the inner ring of Iranian land-based firepower, the fleet plays to its strengths, engaging hazards in the open ocean, where the Aegis and Hawkeye combination is most effective. This forward-leaning but distanced posture allows the economic blockade to continue while minimizing the risk of a lucky shot from a concealed coastal battery along the Strait of Hormuz. The prolonged nature of this maritime siege introduces a new variable: personnel and mechanical endurance. Unlike a short-term skirmish, the 2026 blockade requires the crew to maintain a state of high alert fatigue for months. The continuous operation of the Spy-1 radar and the demanding rotation of the gas turbine propulsion systems require a rigorous maintenance schedule that is difficult to sustain in a combat zone. The logistical tail required to keep these ships fueled and fed is under constant pressure. Combat logistics force ships, such as the Henry J. Kaiser-class replenishers, must brave the same drone-infested waters to deliver supplies. This creates a secondary vulnerability where the attacker does not need to hit the destroyer itself, they only need to sever the umbilical cord of fuel and food. Strategic planners are now looking toward autonomous resupply vessels and 3D printing capabilities on deck to reduce this reliance on supply lines. The blockade of 2026 serves as a permanent signal to maritime security planners that the ocean is no longer a sanctuary, and cost efficiency will define victory in the next decade. Success in the future will depend on the deployment of directed energy systems, such as the Helios laser, which can neutralize low-cost targets for the price of the electricity used to fire them. Until these technologies are fleet-wide, the reliance on interceptors remains a strategic bottleneck. Naval commanders must also adapt to an environment where the battle for the narrative is fought in real time on social media and through commercial satellite imagery. The era of the fog of war is being replaced by transparency, where every movement is tracked by private sector actors and shared globally in seconds. As we move further into the 2020s, the ability to maintain an economic cordon will rely less on brute force and more on the ability to sustain a high-tech presence under the crushing weight of asymmetric math. The grey-hulled sentinels of the 21st century must be prepared to fight in the water, the air, and in the minds of the global public. The legacy of this standoff will be the slow, grinding realization that the cost of keeping the seas open is rising with every passing dawn. The strategic competition in the Gulf of Oman is merely the first chapter in a new era of naval history, where data, endurance, and economic resilience are the primary weapons of choice. Looking toward the future, the question is how long this cycle of escalation can be sustained before the financial and logistical costs become unbearable for one of the participants. With global energy markets hanging in the balance and the threat of regional instability looming, the stakes are high. The trade interdiction continues, the drones keep flying, and the world watches the blue light of the combat information centers for the next move in this high-stakes game of maritime chess. This is a preview of the next century of conflict, where the lines between reality and propaganda are as blurred as a radar return in a storm. As the sun sets on another day of the blockade, the silent sentinels continue their watch, knowing that the next swarm is always just beyond the radar horizon.